Electronic Arts dominates the American video game market today with sport games, but they were doing the exact same thing in 1993. When their European division asks them to make a soccer game, the American executives laugh in their faces. They think soccer is a joke. They predict the game will be a catastrophic financial failure. To shut the Europeans up, EA gives a development team in Canada a shoestring budget. They buy the official FIFA license to slap on the box, but when the developers open the contract, they realize they have been scammed. The license is completely empty. This is the raw, unvarnished history of FIFA International Soccer on the Sega Genesis and SNES, a story of corporate arrogance, a worthless piece of paper, and the isometric programming miracle that accidentally birthed a multi-billion-dollar franchise. Forget the modern microtransactions. This is the truth of how the biggest sports franchise in history was almost killed by its own creators. In the early 90s, soccer video games were terrible. They were either played from a top-down view or a side-scrolling perspective. They looked like arcade toys. EA Europe knew that if they wanted to capture the global market, they needed a soccer game that looked like a live television broadcast. But EA's American executives fought against it. They believed Americans would never buy a soccer game, and they didn't care about Europe. They handed the project to EA Canada, gave them a tiny team led by producer Bruce McMillan, and essentially told them to hurry up and fail. The team in Canada ignored the executives. They wanted to build a proper simulation. To make the game look like television, they had to invent a new perspective, the isometric view. This was a complex engineering challenge. The 16-bit Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo were not designed to render diagonal 3D-style geometry. The developers had to write complex mathematical algorithms to fake depth perception. They had to program the ball to scale in size as it flew through the air, to trick the eye into seeing a z-axis. But the technical war was nothing compared to the licensing disaster. EA executives paid a small fee to secure the FIFA brand name. They thought it would give the game instant credibility, but they didn't read the fine print. The FIFA license only gave them the right to use 4 letters on the box. It did not include the rights to any real teams. It did not include the rights to any real stadiums. And, most brutally, it did not include the FIFA Pro license. They had 0 rights to use the names or likenesses of any real human soccer players. They were building a sports simulation with a roster of ghosts. But the Canadian team refused to quit. They built the game anyway. When it launched in December 1993, EA America projected it would sell a miserable 300,000 copies. It sold 500,000 copies in its first 4 weeks. It became the best-selling EA game of the year. It completely humiliated the American executives and permanently shifted the balance of power in the global video game industry. You've opened the Ultimate Team Packs, you've played the modern tournaments, but the hidden developer inside jokes and broken code we are about to uncover were completely missed by most gamers. Secret number 1, the developer roster. Because EA had a worthless license and 0 rights to use real soccer players, the developers had to invent a global roster out of thin air. They didn't use random name generators, they used themselves. If you look at the rosters for the national teams, the star players are literally the programmers, producers, and their friends. The legendary striker for England is Matt Webster, an EA producer. The star of the Canadian team is Bruce McMillan. The lead programmer, Jan Tion, put himself in the game as Janko Tion. They immortalized their own names in silicon because the executives were too cheap to buy the real ones. Secret number 2, the goalkeeper headbutt exploit. FIFA International Soccer features one of the most hilarious, broken glitches in sports gaming. In 1993, the collision detection AI was primitive. When the opposing goalkeeper catches the ball, he holds it in his hands before punting it down the field. If you run your striker and stand exactly 1 pixel in front of the goalkeeper, the game doesn't know how to process the block. When the goalie attempts to kick the ball, you can press the tackle button. Your striker will physically headbutt or block the ball directly out of the goalie's hands, ricocheting it straight into the empty net for a guaranteed goal. Secret number 3, the Sega Genesis bias. If you play the SNES and Sega Genesis versions side by side, you will notice the Genesis version feels superior. It is faster. The animations are smoother. This was not an accident. It was corporate strategy mixed with hardware reality. Years earlier, EA had successfully reverse-engineered the Sega Genesis hardware, threatening to manufacture their unlicensed cartridges unless Sega gave them a cheaper licensing deal. Sega caved. Because of this, EA had custom, highly advanced Sega development kits. But more importantly, FIFA was built natively around the Genesis architecture. The console's Motorola 68000 processor simply had the faster clock speed necessary to process the continuous calculations required for the isometric perspective. The SNES version was an outsourced port, and running it on a slower CPU inevitably dropped the frame rate. If you wanted optimal performance, you had to own a Sega. Secret number 4. Running from the law. In modern FIFA games, when you commit a slide tackle, the referee blows the whistle, walks up to you, and hands you a red card. You are forced to watch the animation. In FIFA 93, the developers programmed the referee as a physical entity on the pitch, but they forgot to lock the player's movement during the booking process. If you commit a foul and the referee pulls out a card, you can literally just run away from him. The referee will chase you across the entire pitch, Benny Hill style, trying to hand you the card. You can delay your punishment for minutes at a time, just by sprinting in circles around the isometric grass. It is a hilarious programming oversight that turned penalties into a game of tag. The legacy of FIFA International Soccer cannot be overstated. It single-handedly decided the console war in Europe. In America, Nintendo and Sega were fighting a neck-and-neck battle, but in Europe, soccer was a religion. When FIFA launched and European gamers realized the Sega Mega Drive version was vastly superior to the Super Nintendo port, they bought Sega hardware by the millions. FIFA legitimized the Mega Drive and handed Sega the European continent on a silver platter. But its true impact is the empire it spawned. The American executives who laughed at the concept were forced to watch as FIFA became one of the most lucrative entertainment property in EA's history. It birthed a franchise that generated over $20 billion in revenue. It created the ultimate team blueprint that rewired the entire modern gaming industry. And the ultimate irony? 30 years later, in 2023, EA finally realized what the original developers knew in 1993. The FIFA name on the box was worthless. EA dropped the license, rebranded to EA Sports FC, and the games kept selling anyway. A tiny Canadian team with a shoestring budget and a fake roster built a 16-bit isometric miracle that conquered the globe. If you want the raw truth behind classic gaming history, hit subscribe. See you in the next one.